So let's then begin with the definition. So for this, I'm going to be referencing Bhai Singh Nabba. So Bhai Singh Nabba Mahan Kosh which likhte ne ke Patshahi de tin arth bande ne. They provide three definitions of the term Patshahi. Pehla arth banda Patshahi da Badshahi or Padshahi. So what he says is that it's just another word for Badshah. So we all know what Patshahi is. A Patshahi is somebody who is a king or a ruler, an emperor, somebody who sits on a throne. So that's a fairly straightforward definition of the term Patshahi. Dujja arth dinde ne Patshahi da Satguru di amaldari. Hun amaldari da arth banda hukumat. So Bhai Singh Nabba tells us that the word Patshahi refers to the Satguru's amaldari. So it's the Satguru's governance. And I use the word governance and not government because that can mean something quite specific in today's day and age. So that's the second definition that they provide. And then the third definition they provide is, they say, Sachi Badshahat de Das Guru Saiban. So again, you can see that it's very clear, something quite specific. It's to do with a king, it's to do with ruling, Raj Bhag de Gallane. And he's talking about Satguru di Amaldari. So he's talking in reference to the Guru's Darbar that was established by the Gurus themselves. And Bhai Singh Nabba is writing in around the 1920s. Mahan Kosh is well referenced as a go-to source on Sikh history, and he's a great Sikh scholar. So, like I said, from reading Mahan Kosh, it's very clear. He's talking about something quite specific. He's talking about Raj, he's talking about sitting on thrones and ruling. So, jada Patshahi dawa ya sanu jada Sikhan nu milya, the Khalsa received, that comes from the Guru's Darbar. It comes from the bakshish of the Guru. And for me, this reflects the parallel power structures that the Guru Sahibans themselves built. And it starts from Kartarpur Sahib. So often when we think about Raj, we think about the Guru's Darbar, we think about Miri Piri, for example. Sometimes we may go to a particular Guru Sahiban. Sometimes we may think of the Khalsa, we may think of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, we may think of Anandpur Sahib. But when we look at our Itihas, when we read Puratan Granths, our pre-colonial Sikh literature, it's very clear that those writers would refer to all of the Guru Sahiban as Sache Patshahi. Ratan Singh Pangu, Panth Prakash vich likhde ne, he says that when jadon Gore Pehla Punjab vich aaye si, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ once they took over Punjab after Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom fell, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਗੋਰੇ ਨੇ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਦਾਵਾ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਮਿਲਿਆ? Where did the Sikhs acquire the power or the authority to rule? Who gave them that power? ਤਾਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਉਹ Ratan Singh Pangu ਲਿਖਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਕਿ this power was given to us by Sache Patshahi. And then the Gora Captain Murray asks, well, who is this Sache Patshahi? Because they knew about the Mughals, they knew about other principalities and other kingdoms, but they hadn't heard of how or why the Sikhs were ruling. Obviously Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom, but before them, the Misl Sardars, and before them, Banda Singh Bahadur. And then Ratan Singh Pangu says that Sache Patshahi is Guru Nanak Sahib. And then the Gora's response, Captain Murray, he laughs, he says, Guru Nanak Sahib, I heard he was a fakir, I heard he was a Mehta Sunasi Sadhu San, that they were just a holy person. What did they know about political office and ruling and Raj? And then Panth Prakash vich likhya gaya, Hame kahyo wo Shahen ko Shah, Deen Duni Sacho Patshahi. And then Ratan Singh Pangu writes the entire Panth Prakash, which is again referenced throughout the world by Kathavatics, scholars. The entire Panth Prakash is written on that one question because they wanted to find out where the Sikhs received their power to establish Raj. And within Panth Prakash, we'll read other panktiyas such as Khalso hove khud khuda jin khubi khoob khudai aan na mane aan ki sache bin Patshahi. So the idea of Patshahi and Raj, it was bestowed upon the Sikhs by the Guru, right from Guru Nanak Sahib, from Kartarpur Sahib. And this is the focus of the book Patshahi Mehima, which is available, will be available downstairs later on as well. And it looks at the centrality of the Guru's Darbar within the Sikh movement right from the offset. Some of you may have read Sardar Jagjit Singh's work, Percussions of Sikh History, and in that book he speaks about how the Guru Sahib created the Sikh Panth outside of the caste system, outside of the clutches of Brahmanism. And Ogal Thika, they did that, but what I try to present based on the Puratan Granths is that they were able to do that because of Patshahi, because they themselves were such a Patshahi. So like we say, the Sikh Qawm is a Vakri Qawm, the Nyarapan of the Sikh Qawm. And that Nyarapan exists because of Patshahi, because of Sikh sovereignty. And like I said, that begins from Kartarpur Sahib. So when Guru Nanak Sahib goes on their Udasiya, they return back to Punjab. So they go around on their Udasiya, they speak to various people, they challenge people, positions of power, they call out the hypocrisy wherever they go, Mecca, Medina, Baghdad, but then they come back to Punjab. They come back to Punjab and they buy some land and they establish Kartarpur Sahib. Kartarpur Sahib is then the first, what I would call the first sovereign Sikh space where the Gurmukhs can assemble, where Sangat like this is established, and the Gurus, and more importantly, the Guru's Darbar is established. So the Guru's Darbar is the focal point of the Sikh Panth. And even today, and then that continues throughout Khadur Sahib, Govindwal Sahib, Taran Taran, Kirpur Sahib, all the way to Anandpur Sahib. At the center of the Sikh movement remains the Guru's Darbar. And we see that in existence today as well. No matter which Gurukar we go to in the world, Jithe Marji Abba Jandya, the place where Guru Sahib is Birajman on their takht, that room we refer to as Darbar Sahib. We don't call it a prayer room. Even when you walk in Chandoa Sahib, Jawar Sahib, Shastra, Tari Gursikh, always on duty, Peridar, and and Shastra in front, these are the hallmarks of a sovereign Sikh space. No other quote-unquote religious text or peoples have this space for what they bow to, but we do. And that's because of the way in which the Guru's Darbar was established from Kartarpur Sahib. So Patshahi holds a very special place in the Sikh Panth. Patshahi Guru ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਕੀਮਤੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਹਰੇਕ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਲਈ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਸਰੋਤ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਰਹੇਗੀ. And this is something that when we look towards our itihas, we remember it fondly. ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮਿਸਲ ਸਰਦਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਬਗੇਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, or even before them, Banda Singh Bahadur, and the way in which they moved from the south up, and they established Khalsa Raj within 18 months of the mandate from Guru Gobind Singh Ji. That's something we celebrate, something we have pictures up on our walls at home, perhaps in the Gurukar, in museums, maybe elsewhere. And then something changes, something occurs in Punjab in the middle of the 1800s, where there's a slight deviation, and Jiri Raj Bagh di Gal hai, that kind of gets left on slightly to one side for a little while, but it then resurfaces later on. So what the book does is it charts the revolutionary rise of the Sikh Panth, and it looks at how Sikh sovereignty was an integral part of that. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਾਜ ਭਾਗ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਦਾਵੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, it's not separate, it's not outside, it doesn't come afterwards, it's always there from the beginning. ਗੁਰੂ ਕਾਲ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਤੇ 1708 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ Ratan Simple Gugain, he says ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਰਾਜ ਕਰੇ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਲੜ ਮਰੇ. When he's describing that period between 1708 and roughly 1849, 150 years, he says ਇਹੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਹੈ. ਜਾਂ ਰਾਜ ਕਰੇ ਜਾਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਲੜ ਮਰੇ. And then if we look at our itihas since 1849, we look at how things have perhaps changed and where our focus has been. So that for me was something that I felt needed to be addressed, because there's a lot of writers that have written books about us. British writers, Indian nationalists, As an example, I always bring this up, that Khushwant Singh the book, they've written quite a lot. He wrote a book called The History of the Sikhs. ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ he has no problem speaking about ਬੰਦਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਹਾਦਰ or ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ 18ਵੀਂ ਸਦੀ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸਨ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ he's okay as a historian but when he speaks about ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਰਤਮਾਨ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਏ ਹਨ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਗਦਰੀ ਬਾਬੇ he changes his narrative he no longer refers to them as Sikhs or as shaheeds in that sense. He starts to call them terrorists or extremists or Marxists or somebody else. So why is that? Why does his narrative change when it comes to speaking about those Sikhs? Because for us, when we read their Jeevanis, when we read their own writings, when we hear their speeches, for example, Sant Niyaz Singh Ji's speeches are available online, we can see sanu pata lagda hai ki only je prerna si that came from the Guru's Darbar. They were, we accept them as Qawmi Shaheeds. So within the Sikh world, within Sikh spaces, we have no problem with that. But when others write our history, they seem to diverge and try to create this difference. So that was a really something that I felt, like I said, needed to be looked at and challenged. So that's one thing, the way in which history has been distorted. But the other thing they do is they don't just stop at pointing fingers or saying there's a difference between the shaheeds. They do that with the Guru Sahibaan as well. So the other books that exist that have been written, they'll say, for example, that Patshahi, they were peaceful, they were pacifists, they were sadhus. And even the Mughal memoirs, see Bahadur Shah, when we read their records, they did the same thing as well. But when they speak about Guru Har Gobind Sahib Patshahi or the next 5 Guru Sahibaan, then they say, well, then they became more militant. So yes, we accept that Guru Sahib established the Akal Takht. Yes, they established the Akal Sena, and later on the Khalsa. But ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੋਚ ਸੀ ਉਹ Guru Nanak Sahib ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ. And when we read our itihas, when we read, for example, Bansabli Nama by Kesar Singh Shibbar, he writes in 1769, and he says that there's no difference between Guru Nanak Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. Das se jam ek jyot samay, that they were just one jyot in 10 bodies. And all of the Puratan Granths, Suraj Prakash, Pant Prakash, Mehima Prakash, all of these Granths that we have, that we read, they speak about that oneness of the Guru's jyot. They speak about Sache Patshahi, they speak about the Guru's Darbar, they speak about Raj, Miri Piri. But after, when the colonizer arrives in Punjab, then Sikhi becomes, they redefine Sikhi, and it becomes a religion. Like Sikhism is then born. So then when the Sikhs aspire to become rulers, or when they try to then establish their Raj, that's when it becomes a problem, because then they're religious extremists, because they've already defined us as just a religion. They've stripped away that political edge that we had right from the offset. So when we consider, when we read Guru Itihas, when we read the history of our Gurus, the history of our Sikhs, it's clear. If you can see it clearly, the way in which the narrative changes. Some of you in the Sangat may have read some of those Puratan Granths, and it is quite laughable how the narrative changes so much. But the books continue to be reproduced. Western scholarship in particular has been quite damaging as well. There's one particular scholar called Hugh MacLeod who wrote a book in the 1960s, 1970s. तो वो अपनी किताब विच यही बात करता है कि that there was a break in the ideology, that Guru Har Gobind Sahib Patshahi, they went down a different route to what Guru Nanak Sahib had started. And then what we find is that these books and then these narratives, they find their way slowly into the Sangat. And with Guru Sahib's Kripa, obviously Sangat does know as well, but some of us who don't, it can make us doubt, and these questions then are raised, and then they linger on and they affect our next generation. But for us, like I said, in the Sikh world, we see all of the shaheeds as the same. No matter which, ਭਾਵੇਂ 18ਵੀਂ ਸਦੀ 19ਵੀਂ 20ਵੀਂ ਸਦੀ ਦੇ ਹੋਣ, ਪੰਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹੀ ਮਾਨਤਾ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, because we see that their inspiration and their aspiration, both ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਮਿਲੀ ਸੀ, and they're working for the ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ of the ਪੰਥ। ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਰਾਜ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, that's because ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਭਾਵਨਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ। So again, we accept that, we celebrate that. You know, we celebrate Sardar Bhai Singh, we'll celebrate Jasar Singh Ahluwalia, we'll celebrate all of those 18th century Sikh warriors, towering Sikh warriors. We'll have their pictures up on our walls. And in the same way, we'll celebrate what took place in 84 in terms of how the Singhs fought back. How Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, General Shubeg Singh Ji, Bhai Malik Singh Ji, Shaheed. And after as well, ਜਦੋਂ 1986 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ Khalistan ਦੇ ਐਲਾਨ ਨਾਲ, we celebrate that because that's the Sikh spirit. That's how the Sikh resists. And because the pursuit of Raj, of Sikh sovereignty, was given to us by the Guru. So the reason why I wanted to highlight that was because it's okay for us, I think, sometimes we feel as though we can speak about certain things within certain gurukars or certain spaces, but sometimes we self-erase in certain spaces because we'll think, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that word here, maybe I shouldn't say Khalistan, maybe I shouldn't say Khalsa Raj even. But there's no denying, when we look at our itihas, when we look at the words and actions of those who we look up to, of people like Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, for them it was clear as well. So the first half of the book looks at the Guru period from Guru Nanak Dev Ji to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and then the second half looks at the Khalsa. And what the book does is it demonstrates that there's been various manifestations of Raj. Like Ranjit Singh's Raj was not the first nor the last expression of Sikh sovereignty. So prior to them, like I've said, we had the Missal Sardars who had different territory. There was 11 Missals where they raised the Nishan Sahibs, coins were minted in the name of the Guru Sahibaan. Prior to them, there was Banda Singh. Prior to them, the book shows that actually the Guru's Darbar itself was also a manifestation of Sikh sovereignty. In Anandpur Sahib as well, the first battle, the Battle of Bangani, that Guru Sahib fights, if we read Sid Guru Soba, Senapati writes, he provides a context for the battle. And he says that the other Jere Pahari Rajasthan, they had become weary of what was taking place in the Guru's Darbar, because the Guru's Darbar was growing at such a pace that they felt it was a threat to their Raj. So that's why they asked Guru Sahib to vacate, and Guru Sahib said no, and then the battle commences. So the very first battle, you could say, was to defend sovereign Sikh territory. Now that's not to say that the Sikhs pursue Raj just for the sake of holding particular territory or just for sitting on a throne, but Guru Sahib sanu farmaunde ne taqat behe taqat ke layak, ਕਿ ਉਹੀ ਜੀਵ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਕਤ ਤੇ ਬੈਠਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤਾਕਤ ਬੈਠਣ ਦੇ ਲਾਇਕ ਹੋਵੇ। ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਅਗਲੀ ਪੰਕਤੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਰਮਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਪੰਜ ਸਮਾਇਨ ਗੁਰਮਤਿ ਪਾਏ, ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜੀਵ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਦਰਲੇ ਪੰਜ ਚੋਰ ਸੰਭਾਲ ਕੇ ਕਾਮ, ਕ੍ਰੋਧ, ਲੋਭ, ਓਂਕਾਰ, ਉਹੀ ਫਿਰ ਤਾਕਤ ਬੈਠਣ ਦਾ ਲਾਇਕ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ। And if you look at our itihas, our the Sikhs from our history, they recognize those who were not worthy of sitting on thrones in the 18th century. And like I said, we celebrate that. And the same thing happens if you look at 1947 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਹੈ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ, ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੂਬਾ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਦੀ ਅਨੰਦਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਮਤੇ, that's because the Sikhs were realizing that these people are not worthy of sitting on thrones. You know, from that perspective, ਕਿ ਇੰਦਰਾ ਗਾਂਧੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਬੈਠਣ ਦੇ ਲਾਇਕ ਸੀ ਗੁਰਮਤਿ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ, ਤਾਕਤ ਬਹਿ ਤਾਕਤ ਕੇ ਲਾਇਕ, or even her son, even her father, Jawaharlal Nehru. And the thing is, the Sikhs recognized that when they tried to exercise the way of the Khalsa, that's when they were demonized. Until this day, sovereign Sikh action is criminalized. You know, I couldn't do this in Punjab, maybe I couldn't speak so openly about our history about what took place in '84. Singhs in the past years have been picked up and thrown into jail just for carrying certain books on them. And we all know of what happens. We're all following Jaggi's case as well, for example. So, but the thing is, we have to continue to make sure that the narrative is preserved, because we can't rely on it being preserved by others. If we look at the way in which books have been written by the British, by the Indians, they openly try to distort our history. That's something that, myself and the National Sikh Youth Federation, we felt that it needed to be challenged. So that's all I wanted to mention briefly. The book, hopefully we can have a stall downstairs to one side. The book will be available here. I also was hoping to show a small trailer, but the link isn't working. There's a new documentary film coming out. It's coming out end of May. It's a 2.5 hour film, documentary, in Punjabi with English subtitles, and it depicts the Battle of Amritsar 1984. It's the first time it's been done. It's been 6 years in the making. It's had a massive budget. The work has all been done now. It's been cut to a cinematic level, so the plan is to have it shown in cinemas. So maybe I'll send the link to Gurjeet Singh. Maybe you can share that at a later date. I think some of the other Guru Guards might be taking it on in Bradford as well. But what the documentary does is it shows the build-up, the context behind what took place in '84, and it links it to the idea of Patshahi. So that's something to look forward to. And just finally, when at the beginning I said that what makes Patshahi unique, Patshahi di Valakanta Mahatata for the Sikhs, is because the Gurus, the Patshahi bestowed upon the Khalsa by the Guru was from the Guru. So it was inspired by Ilahi Bani. It was inspired by values such as Sabatapala, Sanji Balta, Parapakari, all these ideas that we read, all these values that we preserve and value from Guru Granth Sahib Ji. That's the Raj that the Sikhs want to establish. Halemi Raj. And with Guru Sahib's Kripa, that one day will happen. If I've said anything wrong, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.